I said, when I told him, I said, it's going to change some more and bring it back.
Yeah, I asked him how many of them.
I think they
Good evening. Good evening. Good evening, everyone.
3.
Come on down. Have a seat. Let me first. My name's Ken Thompson. I'm the lead monitor for the BPD consent decree. I want to first of all thank Lifebridge for arranging to have us here for this fabulous meal. This is pretty daggone good. I might come here for Thanksgiving. Anyway, we want to respect everyone's time, so let me go through this very quickly. With me today, I have a good many of the members of my monitoring team. I start with Evan Shea, who's one of the deputies. I have Dr. Randy DuPont, who is going to talk a little bit about behavioral health, and I have Ms. Nola Joyce, who will talk about a bunch of things that you're going to hear about this afternoon. Let me just real quick, I'm certain everybody in here knows about the consent decree, but let me refresh your recollection for those who may not know much about it. Let me just give you a quick 2-minute primer. Back in 2015, I think everyone remembers the Freddie Gray event. And as a result of that, Mayor Rawlings Blake asked the Department of Justice to come in to do what's called a pattern and practice investigation. The Department of Justice came in 2016, they did the investigation, and they found, to no one's great surprise, that the Baltimore City Police Department back then was engaging what they call an unconstitutional violation of people's individual rights. Now, 2 things could have happened, or maybe 3 things, but the Department of Justice could have sued Baltimore. They could have had a long, drawn-out lawsuit. That lawsuit would probably still be going on today because these kinds of cases just take a long time to begin and to end. But the city and BPD decided to go another route. They decided, well, let's figure out if we can settle this. And it's almost like if you have a car accident and you get hit by a car, let's say a bus company, and you want to sue them. Well, you have a lawyer. Before they file a lawsuit, they try to work out a settlement. So that's what happened here. The lawyers for the city and BPD began to talk to the lawyers at the Department of Justice, and they figured out, look, it made a lot more sense, and it would probably save some time and a lot of money if we sat down and figured out a way to resolve our differences. And so the lawyers for the city, the lawyers for BPD, and the lawyers for the Department of Justice spent about a year hammering out a bunch of reforms, and at the end of the day, they came up with a document. It's 511 paragraphs in 17 different areas, and this is what we call the consent decree. And what the consent decree is designed to do, the idea is if all of those 17 areas are satisfied, the hope is that the Baltimore City Police Department will at some point in time become what we call a 21st century constitutional police department. So the first few years of this process, and by the way, the monitoring team came in because the judge who is assigned to oversee this case, he knew he needed help. He could not watch this by himself, and so he essentially brought on board a monitoring team, which I have the pleasure of leading. And my idea and our job is to help this judge oversee the progress or lack of progress that the city and BPD are making. Now, for the first, we came on board probably in 2018. For the first 4 years, we spent a lot of time helping the department, along with the Department of Justice, devising or fixing or coming up with new policies and coming up with training and things like that. And the idea was you had to lay a foundation so this department could become better. I would say sometime in 2022, Judge Bedard, who was the federal judge overseeing this, he came to the monitoring team and he said, look, everybody spent enough time helping the city and BPD, learn what they should be doing, what they should have known 100 years ago, but you spent a lot of time helping them. Now it's time to figure out whether all this time, money, and effort is bearing some fruit. And so the judge ordered the monitoring team, or directed the monitoring team, to begin doing what we call assessments. And that is our job now, and it's been this way now for a good 2.5, 3 years, is we sit down and we evaluate using data. We don't guess, we don't speculate, we don't look at it and say, this feels like they're doing good. What we do is we assemble all data that we can get our hands on, and we do an analysis. And so that's where we are now. We have been in this process now for a while. We've done probably 20, 25 different assessments over the last 2.5 years. And during that period of time, we have a ranking, and I'm going to give you some fancy terms in a minute, but the ones that really are important, there's something called full and effective compliance, and there's something called sustained compliance. Why is that important? Well, that's important because when we do our data analysis, we look at the different paragraphs that make up these 17 areas. And let's take, for example, transport of people in custody. I think there may have been, I don't know, 12 or 13 paragraphs in that area. When we did our evaluation and we looked at body-worn camera footage, we looked at all kinds of stuff. I think sometime last year we decided, you know what, the department has now met the requirements, all 13 or 14 requirements in that section. And once they meet all of the requirements in a particular section, we find them in what's called full and effective compliance. And if they stay in that area for at least a year, they come in what we call sustained compliance. And what that means, and this is why people in Baltimore should care, because at that stage, that area is no longer under federal oversight. So the department is then given a clean bill of health on that one area. Last year, this year, early this year, in January of 2024, there were 2 areas that the monitoring team recommended to the court that we believe the department was in full and effective compliance. One was transport of individuals in custody, the other was officer wellness. The judge heard the evidence at a public hearing, just like we're going to do tomorrow, and he determined and he found that at least in those 2 areas out of 17, that the Baltimore City Police Department was indeed in full and effective compliance. So that leaves 15, because there's 17. I'm pleased to report that come January, let's say in the next few months, I think we're going to find that there will be 3 more areas that we're going to ask the judge, and I'm pretty comfortable he's going to find 3 more areas that the department is in full and effective compliance. They would be First Amendment, they would be school police, and they would be coordination with, coordination with school police. No, that's not. School police, First Amendment, Community Oversight Task Force, that's right. Why is that important? Well, what we're trying to do is, you've heard the joke, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Well, this is kind of what we're doing. We're trying to get this department to a point where we try to do rigorous analyses. We look at a lot of data, we look at a lot of body-worn camera footage. We don't just want to look at what somebody tells us. We don't want to just look at a document. We want to look at the actual action on the street. And the good thing about a body-worn camera and the footage we get to look at, we don't have to decide who's lying and who's not, because we now can see for ourselves exactly what happened. So I'm very confident that come the first quarter of 2025, there will be 5 areas in the consent decree that are now under what we call full and effective compliance. And so I could spend all day going through this process, but I bought these really, well, they're nice people because they don't charge them anywhere near what they're worth. But they are some of the best in the country. I've got some of the best subject matter experts in the country. And we have 6 areas this quarter that we're going to talk about. And one of the areas that I think deserves a lot of attention is what we call behavioral health and people in crisis. And that's folks who have mental issues, who, in many cases, through no fault of their own, they have run-ins with the police. And one of the things we wanted to make sure, one of the first things we wanted to fix, was to make sure police officers were trained how to deal with people who had or having emotional problems. So I have Dr. DuPont, who's really the godfather of the crisis intervention team methodology. I'm going to ask him to spend a few minutes talking a little bit about what you do.
Appreciate it. Folks, first of all, I want to thank you all for inviting us here. And I do want to say that I'm from Memphis, Tennessee, and actually mac and cheese is one of the big dishes. And I've got to tell you all, I would put this mac and cheese up against anything else.
It's really good, isn't
that good?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
So if you haven't got it,
we ain't had mine yet.
Well, I didn't hear yours. Yours is even better?
Yeah.
Well, I think you need to move to Memphis and open a restaurant. My recommendation is, and I'll see what I can do about it, never mind. Okay. No, I am impressed with it, and I want to thank you all for being such nice hosts. This is really very nice of you all. Folks, my area is behavioral health, but it's more broad than that. The consent decree is looking at two major things. The first thing they're looking at is do the police have a good program to respond to individuals who might have disabilities or who might be struggling with behavioral health issues? And do they have a good program? Are they showing good ways of developing policies so that it affects the entire department? Do they have skilled leadership when they're at an incident? Do they also, are they being able to translate what they're being taught into what happens on the street? But there's a second part of this that I think will concern you all in this agency even more, which is what they're also looking at is, does the system support the police so that people who are struggling with these issues and people who are subject to trauma and are victims of trauma, are they getting the help and are they getting the kind of assistance that they need? And that's part of the city's responsibility to tackle that as well in conjunction with the mental health system. So one of the things I hope to learn at some point after when we have some discussions, a little more about how this agency and what it offers interfaces with the kind of system that's been developed to try to also provide some support and a pathway to support for those individuals that the police encounter. So it's very important to do that. Let me quickly just kind of go over a couple things. As Ken Thompson talked about it, that when we started with this process, it was very clear that that there was no real meaningful community input. And what's happened instead, I think, that I'm impressed with, is they've gone from a community advisory committee that frankly had a very limited number of people to meetings now where they have 30 to 50 and 60 more people attending on a regular basis. And those individuals have gotten together, and these are individuals who, some of whom have very impressive and credentials and are mental health professionals, others of whom are equally impressive because they bring life experience and they have lived experiences that make a difference, and they're advocates for change. And those individuals come together and have looked at the policy of the police and have really had meaningful input into that policy. And have developed a policy that people from all over the country are coming to look at, and that's a very important beginning. And we've had that kind of beginning. But what I want to do is also invite you all to participate in that group. If you're not part of that, we need you to be a part of it, because that is probably the engine that drives a lot of what's going on, and that will continue to drive it. Because what this group does is take a look at incidents and ask, and they have a review panel that looks at it and brings it to this group and says, these are some of our recommendations. Does this make sense to you? And what other kind of things need to happen? And that has made a difference. So, for example, one of the changes that I think is driven by both the police department, the city, and this group was that Maryland passed a law that says that we will be able to look at individual incidents and be able to understand what went on and make recommendations that will make a change. So we're very impressed with that kind of impact of a group that's from the community and involved. But I would encourage you, if you've not heard of it before, we want you to join. And that group has now moved from being a few people to being many individuals who are serious about it. Some of them are professionals that you would recognize where they're from Johns Hopkins, University of Maryland, etc. And others are from groups that are really being able to do advocacy on a very community-based level and making a difference. So I want to encourage you to be a part of that. I think it really has grown and become a very important part of the city's structure and the city's responsibility for making changes in the system. All right? But I will tell you one of the concerns I have about what I just said to you. When I look at some of the tapes that we're looking at, the officers may do a good job. But when it comes to saying, okay, now what kind of help can we provide for this person? And when it comes for other professionals that are on the scene saying things, I don't hear them say, well, what we're seeing the changes, but I don't hear them say we believe in the changes yet. People are saying, look, we've been 20 and 30 years in this community not having the response we expect or need. And so when I'm saying, well, what we're seeing is that they're starting to finally make that response available. That they have gone from having 3 or 4 community-based mobile teams that go out to the community to having 15. Okay, that the state has put up on the order of $40 million of funding over the last several years to change the way that the system works and make it so that they can actually have a contact between providers like this agency that are available, and that they would have an ability to say, okay, we can immediately tie the individuals in need to the services that are available. But unless the community understands that and believes in that, and unless the police believe in it as well, we're not going to get the results that we want. Because even if you improve a system, if nobody believes it works and they don't try it, then we have trouble. So that's an important element that we need to challenge. That's the challenge I think we're facing. What's the good news, though? The good news is that the policies that they have developed, I think, are very impressive, and I think if you got a chance to read them, you would be equally impressed. And when they make changes, they open it up for the entire community to voice the changes and to also critique the policy before it gets out there. So I am impressed with that. Ken was part of a group that looked at, and along with I did as well, we looked at body-worn camera footage randomly picked out of a total group of 10,000 cases. We picked at random a scientifically valid sample to say, these are enough cases that we can have confidence that it represents what's happening here. And I've got to tell you the truth. What I saw was pretty impressive. Okay, what I saw was pretty moving. And I want to share one of them with you by disguising some of the details, but just giving you a quick overview of it. What I saw was an individual who was a police officer who was called to intervene, and he intervened with a family. He met the mother that was there. And the mother was very angry, to be honest with you. I was very pessimistic, and I'm saying, I don't see how this is going to get resolved. But she had a daughter that she was angry at, and there was a lot of conflict. So he had his partner talk to the mother, and he talked to the daughter. And of course, what he finds out is that she's had a history of trauma in her life, the kind of things that this agency deals with that many of you have dealt with. And what he found that out, his response wasn't to lecture or to say, hey, you need to behave yourself. His response was to say, that must be difficult, and to talk about how he understood that that must be a struggle for her to have to deal with the impact of that trauma. So I'm thinking, okay, well, this is starting to move better. The young woman that's there is starting to calm down. She's talked to the officer, and she's interested in getting help. But he goes back to the mother. And when he goes back to the mother, he goes to the mother, and he's trying to tell her the story of what he's learned about her daughter. And the mother's angry. The mother is saying very angry things. And I'm saying to myself when I'm watching the tape, this is not going to get resolved. How can this get resolved? This is so discouraging that, And in the meantime, so the officer comes and he tells her about the trauma. And you would think that as a mother, that the mother would sort of be sympathetic to her daughter once she understood that there's a trauma, what's going on. But she wasn't. She was angry. And so the officer didn't get angry back or decide to, say to her, well, what kind of parent are you, or anything like that. He asked her about herself, and he found out that she had lost a relative, a sister, to violence only a few months before. And so you know what he did? He became sympathetic to the mother and her plight. And in doing so, the mother begins to calm down. She begins to take an interest in her daughter's struggling is. And the two of them start talking about, and the officers using terms like loving each other and things that you don't normally expect. But I was impressed. And that moved me quite a bit to look and say, look, that kind of difference is the beginning of something happening that's better. And I think you all should be aware of that and hopefully get to see that with the police officer that you encounter, to realize that indeed there's a cultural change occurring in the department that's going to show itself over time, that hopefully will change some of the negative attitudes about the police and about how they respond, and make a difference in the way that individuals get their help, and that pathway is established so that not only the police are able to help, but they have the faith and community resources that are out there that people know about. I've been working with this city for 7 years now, and I'll be honest, I didn't know about this agency. That's ridiculous for me not to have known, but I should have. But on the other hand, if I don't know, it means that that word isn't getting around to the officers so that they can utilize these kind of things that are available. So I wanted to share that with you and tell you that I'm optimistic because I see change occurring, that we've seen that change documented, and I think it's making a difference. But on the other hand, what concerns me is that that change is not working its way to the community yet, and I would certainly want to hear from you all at some point, that if we can later on, after the questions and answers and all, to know more about how we might be able to make that change work its way to the community. But I think it will over time, but something that took 30 years to build, it's going to take us a long time to change and make a difference in the way that people see it. So I want to thank you all for that, and again, I'd like to...
Thank you, Randy. And what we're going to do, we're going to go through the presentations, and then we'll have questions afterwards, because I do want to get through with the 4 experts. Let me go and ask Nola Joyce to talk a little bit about youth and school police. And the youth issue is somewhat police interaction with youth, and this is somewhat similar to police interaction with people who have behavioral health crises. So I think it makes sense to kind of hear them both, but to have both areas discussed in front of the same group at the same time. So Nola.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Good evening, and thank you for coming out. Appreciate it. Good to see everyone. So I'm gonna, as Kim said, I'm gonna share with you, what we have learned so far and what the police department has done so far in the area of interactions with youth, which is one section, and coordination with the school police, which is a second section. Most recently, in fact, this month, a assessment of these two areas was completed, and I don't know if it's been posted yet. It has been posted. It's been filed and posted, so you can read the assessment yourself if you wish. And they looked, the assessors looked at 4 paragraphs under the youth interaction, and I'll just very briefly explain to you how they made their judgment about these 4 paragraphs, and whether or not, and how BPD is actually performing. They looked at a random sample of interactions that officers had with youth. Now, this could be everything, and included field interviews, custodial detentions, arrests, and use of force. And so they pulled those cases and took a look at how the officers interacted with youth in each of those kinds of circumstances. Then they also, in addition to that, they took a look at use of force data involving youth to determine if they could see any trends that might have been occurring over the recent years. And then thirdly, it looked at an outside assessment that was performed by one of the, by a program that was newly established. It was in pilot in the Western District for alternatives for some youth that meet criteria. And then finally, the assessment team also did some interviews, focus groups with police supervisors and with youth advocates to hear from them their experience of what they've seen or heard and how they deal with the youth interactions by BPD. So, what did they find? They found that BPD has indeed revised its youth-related policies. It revised the interaction policy. Developed a new youth interrogation policy, which is really important. That's when the an officer or a detective begins to interrogate a young person around a crime that they believe he or she might have committed, and how that interrogation happens, and the rules under which that happens. And this is a new policy for them that they put in place. And then it also revised their core use of force policy. This use of force policy applies to all age groups, not just to youth. They implemented training on these policies in addition on how best to have interaction based on developmental principles as young people grow and mature. They also did their own assessments of various programs and agreements that they had in place. And what they have found is that more than 80% of the interactions that they observed, again, much like the body-worn camera footage used with mental health, they looked at the body-worn camera, and they found that 80% of the interactions that they saw between a young person and a police officer were in line with the consent decree, BPD's own policies and protocols, and that these interactions were developmentally appropriate. So it's a big step forward for the department. It's not 100%, it's 80%. And yet, but I think that's significant. They also found that the officers often use the right developmental responses when engaging with youth. They use less force than they did back in 2018 and 29. Level 1 force, that's a serious level of force that's used, had dropped by almost 72% in 2022 compared to 2018. bodily force, which is the, physical, hands-on kind of thing. That could include everything from handcuffing to having to take a person and put them against the wall or on the ground, getting control of the situation. That still remained the most common type of force used both in 2018 and 2022 with young people. So all this progress led to initial compliance in 3 of the paragraphs and on track, implementation on track on the 4th one. Where BPD needs to do more work is to be able to collect and document the field interactions with youth so that they can be identified and retrieved and looked at. So that's a piece of work that they're working on, and they hope their new automated record management system would help with that. The other area they discovered is that although what they saw on officers' body-worn camera was that the officers were doing well, supervisors, not so much. Supervisors being sergeants and lieutenants out in the field, so bosses of the officers, did not quite understand in all cases what to do and how to do it, how to direct their officers in doing that work. And so the monitoring team really suggested and strongly urged the BPD to focus more effort on supervisors and their understanding of what the policies require of their officers. So again, the officers seem to know what to do and how to do it and doing it well. But when a sergeant or a lieutenant's there or asked about something by an officer, not too clear, not too clear. The second big area is the coordination with Baltimore School Police. This is a fairly small section. It's really based on what's called a memorandum of understanding with the Baltimore School Police. That just means there's a written agreement between the Baltimore Police Department and the Baltimore School Police about who does what, where, and how. So, according to this memorandum, Baltimore School Police has power and authority in all of Baltimore under certain circumstances. And they're very limited circumstances. And this MOU lays that out. Also explains the relationship in terms of training and policy and documentation. They have done, they executed a new memorandum. They've done 2 assessments, so you're part of that memorandum and how it's being used and how it's operating. Based on those assessments, they made a couple of revisions each year to that memorandum. And they've also initially had and revised and updated the MOU. So because of all those efforts that the Baltimore Police Department, along with the school police, did, the monitoring team has suggested and that they have reached the material requirements of the consent decree and that they are in full and effective compliance for the Baltimore School Police section in the consent decree. There's a lot in the assessment report, a lot we can talk about, but I'm going to stop there, Kim, so that we have some time.
Let me move to First Amendment. I'm going to ask Evan Shea to talk a little bit about this area. This is another incredibly important area because, again, it involves the interaction between the public and the police department. And of course, those of us who are true Americans who believe in democracy recognize that having the First Amendment right to protest or to complain or to take photographs or whatever when a police officer is doing something is fundamental to our rights to freedom. So this is an important area. Evan has done a marvelous job in terms of looking at the data and doing the assessment. So Evan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ken, and thank you again, all of you, for having us. As Ken mentioned at the beginning, the First Amendment protected activity area in the consent decree is one of the areas we are expecting the court to find the department in full and effective compliance based on an assessment report that we just recently published. The First Amendment protected activity stems from a part of the DOJ's investigation that dealt with problems it saw in the way that the police department honored the First Amendment. And it was really two problems. The first is what many of you may think of when you hear the First Amendment. That is the right to assemble and protest after an event or a political issue. BPD found that, the DOJ found that the BPD was not honoring the citizens' right to protest, particularly organize and protest the police. And again, as Ken mentioned, the investigation occurred shortly after the death of Freddie Gray and the resulting protests that occurred. The other area is not necessarily something that one would think of immediately when thinking of the First Amendment, but it was a very pernicious problem that impacted a very fundamental right. And that was the DOJ found that when citizens would criticize the police, observe the police, record the police, BPD officers would regularly retaliate against them, either by arresting them for low-level, highly discretionary offenses that really had very little meaning and the DOJ found had problems constitutionally, or by preventing the person from observing or recording, or worse, use of force or some other more drastic action. So, at the beginning of the process, the BPD revamped its policies and training, and our assessment sought to evaluate whether the department had solved these two vices that the DOJ found. So how do we do that? How do we evaluate BPD's performance? Well, for the first category, for the right to protest and assemble, we looked at a number of types of evidence from the social justice protests that occurred after the murder of George Floyd in 2020. We looked at random body-worn camera from officers that were deployed during the protests. We looked at footage from the police helicopters that were over the area. We looked at documentation reports and action plans by the police and other evidence. And what we found was a remarkable change. Really, even though the department's revamped policy and training had not fully been rolled out, a remarkable change between the response of those the police to those protests compared to the response to the protest after the death of Freddie Gray. And at the time, we reported on that in our semi-annual reports that we filed with the court, but there was actually some national media attention, positive attention to the way that the BPD responded. So that, in our evaluation, was enough to bring them into compliance in that area. So what about the second area, the retaliation against individuals who were either observing or criticizing the police? Well, what we did as kind of the best view into that is we took a random sample of disorderly conduct arrests. And like I said, the typical retaliation was by arresting someone for the highly discretionary minor offenses like disorderly conduct or interference or offenses like that. And were really just a pretext to punish someone for criticizing police or speaking bad about them. So we looked at those sample of arrests. And again, as Ken mentioned, and I think Randy mentioned as well, we didn't just take the officer's word for it. We just didn't look at the officer's report of those arrests and interactions. We took a look at the body-worn camera of the officer conducting the arrest to see whether what really happened based on the footage. And again, what we found was that in the sample that we looked at, there was only one incident where we saw an officer retaliate against someone for criticizing the police. And we didn't find any instances where the police prevented someone from reporting or observing the police. And in that one instance, it was you can look it up in the news. It was one case where the officer eventually was prosecuted for assaulting the individual who was criticizing him and found guilty. In that area, in addition to looking at uses of force and misconduct complaints to the Public Integrity Bureau, the Internal Affairs Division of the Police Department, we found enough evidence to find that, again, the department had made great progress and had reached a point where the problems that we saw in the DOJ's investigation had been addressed, and the BPD was in full and effective compliance. So we issued that report, and it is now going to go before the judge for him to decide whether he will find the police department in full effective compliance in that area. There is further work to be done. We did find in looking at that in some of there were very isolated incidents, uses of force, and misconduct complaints, which were First Amendment issues. But we saw there that there was still more work to be done in two of the really big areas that we are still assessing that are kind of adjacent to the First Amendment area: misconduct and discipline. So BPD's ability to police their own and hold officers accountable when they commit misconduct, and use of force. Again, whether the BPD is appropriately using force and when they're not, holding officers accountable for bad conduct. We saw some progress that could be made in those areas when looking at these samples. So that's it on First Amendment. Ken, I'll turn it back to you.
You keep the mic because we're going to go right into misconduct. As you can imagine, when you have a couple of thousand people in an agency, I don't care how good the policies are, I don't care how good the training is, I don't care how good the supervision is. Somebody's going to screw up. I mean, that's just the way of the world. You know, you got a couple thousand people. Somebody's going to do something either intentionally bad or, or they make a mistake. But either way, as a police officer, considering the power, in some cases the lethal power that they possess, the public has every right to make certain that the individual officer is held accountable. And so one of the things we have to look at is not so much, we don't evaluate on a case-by-case basis whether an officer violated a policy or whatever. What we are more concerned about is there a system in place that is set up to adequately address a situation when a police officer either makes a mistake or intentionally does something wrong. And so this is the area of misconduct and discipline. And Evan, I'll ask you to talk a little bit about that.
Thanks, Ken. So misconduct. This is, as Ken mentioned, really the paragraphs in the consent decree reforms that we've required from the systems in place to hold officers accountable when they commit misconduct. It's colloquially in most police departments, it's really what's called their internal affairs division. The state of this system in BPD when the consent decree was entered, I think objectively was dire. The police department's misconduct systems were in very, very bad shape. So, again, as Ken mentioned earlier, the first part of the consent decree process involved really rebuilding the Baltimore Police Department's misconduct function from the ground up. That was policies and training, like most areas, new policies, new training, but beyond that, it was new facilities, new personnel, new structure of the organization, all of it really from the ground up, rebuilding it from the very foundation. Much of that has been done. The new policies are in place, new personnel have been hired, there's a new organizational structure, very rigorous new training has been conducted. So what are we doing now? again, we're assessing and evaluating how far the police department's come and whether all the new changes that have been made in the policies and the organization are having a real impact on the way the misconduct cases are being investigated. So, again, we just issued an assessment report in this area in July, and it is a long read by necessity. The consent decree itself has over 500 paragraphs, 500 individual requirements of reforms that the police department needs to do. Over 80 of those are in this area. So there are over 80 specific requirements in the misconduct area. So it's a very, very large section, the largest section in the consent decree. Again, what the core of what we did to evaluate the misconduct section was a review of a random, statistically representative sample of misconduct cases, 91 misconduct cases, to evaluate, again, by not just looking at the reports of the misconduct investigators at the BPD, but looking at body-worn camera, what happened in the case where they're investigating misconduct, the interviews that the police investigators conducted, not just of the officers who were accused of misconduct, but the complaining citizens and other witnesses, in addition to the written reports. And what was the outcome? So some of it was very positive. The monitoring team, we had a group that reviewed these cases, and we had a rating of 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, poor investigation, and 5 being the best. And the monitoring team found that over 72% of the 91 cases sampled were either a 4 or 5, so either very good or excellent investigations of the misconduct. And that means that it was thorough, that the right questions were asked, the right steps were taken. And now that's good, not where we want it to be, but it's particularly good in where the department was earlier in this process. In 2018, so 6 years ago, we did a preliminary assessment of the same kind of drill, looking at random sample cases. And in that assessment, the monitoring team only found 23% of the cases to be either 4 or 5, either very good or excellent. So we've gone from 23% to 72%, which is strong. And beyond that, the assessment found that all those changes that I talked about, a new manual for misconduct investigations, new training, new policies are all in place and strong. So where does the progress need to be made? Well, the progress are, I think the easiest way to say it are the little things. A lot of administrative and procedural steps that the department needs to do in these investigations that they're not doing. Now, that might sound like a little thing. It might sound like, okay, are they checking all the right boxes? But as we mentioned in the report, it's critically important, not just to ensure that investigations on a systematic basis are completing all the steps that need to, and the department can show that, but also for accountability. The monitoring team is not going to be here forever, and they're not going to be a team of people there to look at body-worn camera and do the comprehensive assessment that we're doing, or at least not as fulsomely from an independent perspective. So the police department needs to be able to audit and police itself on kind of a continual basis and have a feedback loop. And the only way they can do that is if they document what they do, so that when someone else other than the person who did it comes along and looks at it after the fact, they can see that all the steps are followed and the investigations are strong. So the BPD, frankly, has a lot of work to do in those areas, and we're going to be following up with them in the coming weeks and months to make sure that they do that and follow through, again, on all these little things to follow through and finish the job of reforming the misconduct function. So that's where we are. More work to be done, and we're looking forward to getting to it.
Thank you, Evan. Let's open up to questions. Yes.
So you mentioned that 91 cases were studied, out of how many?
Good question. Misconduct cases, I think, I don't have the number.
Ballpark, if you.
Yeah, let me, if you give me 1 second, I can look that up for you. But maybe if we could go to a different question.
Let's do another question.
Another question, and I will cut back and I'll give you the
Yes,
exact
sir.
number.
Well, you all gave out a lot of information, and it took quite a while to lay it all out there. I think this is my recommendation, that all the categories that you were gonna give to us should be in little sheets, and everybody could get a sheet and follow those items down and write your own little notes on what you wanted to ask questions about. Because see, you give me a lot of information, I've forgotten a lot of it. I can't answer questions that I had in my mind. And that's gonna be very important.
That's something for us to consider as we fill out.
Right. I'm 80 years old, or 79. I'll be 80 in a few months. I remember the Baltimore City Police Department in my inner city neighborhood, and these guys were terrorists. You know, they. All right. All right. And I have seen a lot of abuse from police departments. And so that has tainted my understanding and my evaluation of the policing process. But that stuff is very important. The Freddie Gray thing and all the rest of it, the gun trace task force that we remember, and they were just thugs in blue uniform. And of course, that has happened a lot over the years, I'm sure. There's a lot of influence about the whole thing coming from Buena Vista Avenue, which is where the police union is, you know. And there is still racism in it. You know, that always winds up being an issue. And so, you know, I applaud you all for doing the work you're doing. I remember when they first announced the Gun Trace Task Force, and it was announced by the Attorney General at the time. I think was she under Barack Obama, was a African-American female.
You mean the investigation?
Yeah, that
was
yeah,
probably
right. And she had announced, that was announced that there was going to be this investigation. And of course, a lot of people were against it. We talk about the body cam. I cannot understand why every incident that happens with a police officer does not have a photographic continuation of that incident. But I've heard that there are times, oh, I forgot to turn my body cam on.
very rare, I can tell you that.
Okay, and
because let me say,
yeah, go ahead.
The policy requires.
Okay.
It's not even have to be an arrest. If an officer is confronting you in anything except a voluntary situation,
Yes.
he or she must turn that camera on. If they don't, they're in violation. And if you do it enough times, you can be fired. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but if it does happen,
I'll just add, we do ride alongs with the police. Someone does it every month, and there was an officer there. He was very upset and got in trouble, and I think he said he was about to lose 30 days of leave just because all he had done wrong, the only thing he had done wrong was failure to turn on his body camera right away when he was encountering someone. And he was upset, but to me, it meant that the system was working.
Is there any reason why that camera is not on all the time? That doing his
Actually, there is.
Huh?
There is, because there are constitutional violation issues with that. That would be effectively having a wiretap. If someone's walking around and just reporting what everyone's saying, that would be a big, and the police were to have that, that would be a big problem for the police. So they get that question a lot, and that's the reason why they can't just when they're walking around, always have their
Okay.
body camera on.
And another issue I wanted to ask about is the qualified immunity. Does the Baltimore City Police Department have that, or are they protected under that law?
Well, that's not a consent decree issue, so.
Okay.
It's not, I mean, that's,
All right.
there are laws, there is some immunity, but that has nothing to do with the consent decree. That's not-
Okay.
that's not-
But
that's not
so
our purview.
so they have the qualified immunity. If they do something, I can't sue them, but they do something
You
to
can
get.
always sue them, but it's a qualified.
Well,
We have, you can sue
You can sue them.
well, what is qualified immunity? Maybe I have the
But
wrong
again, I don't
understanding
wanna-
of it.
There are all kinds of good questions, but let's talk about the
Okay,
consent decree.
you're done. All right. Okay.
Let me finish, you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. The samples were from 2022, 91 cases. There were 1,439 cases in 2022 total. Good question.
Let me go back to, yes, ma'am, and then, yes.
Hi, I have like a plethora of things, cause y'all talked about a lot of stuff. So I'm gonna kind of go in reverse from you. So, as far as police misconduct cases, you said that, one of your issues was with supervisors. First, I wanted to ask, have you ever been through the internal affairs investigative process yourself? Because I have, and it's not an ideal process and is definitely geared towards getting a police officer to have an unsustained finding. It's literally the police investigating themselves. And I understand that the Attorney General investigates the ones where people die, but there are a lot of cases of brutality in our city. I just wanted to put that on point because the internal investigations process is not easy for a civilian to go through when you are the victim of police misconduct and brutality. The only properly investigated misconduct cases in Baltimore City have either been done by the feds or they're overtime, time clock violations, vehicular collisions or whatever. We've not ever seen a properly investigated and prosecuted investigation of misconduct with police brutality cases. We have not. When you're given the cases to overview, which is a very small percentage, if you said there were 1,000 cases and y'all only looked at 91, the randomly selected cases, who randomly selects those? Did you ever think of focusing on the officers who have repeated violations of misconduct? And the issue with the supervisors is probably because they elevate repeat offending officers. I can give you an officer who was involved in the murder of Tyrone West, Jorge Bernardes Ruiz, who has a multitude of misconduct investigations, and was in Northeast District under Worley, who is now the commissioner, and was just passed along and was made a sergeant. He is currently a sergeant, and he's married to a state's attorney. That's a conflict of interest right there. So, did you ever think of looking at those type of officers instead of the ones who were supposedly doing things correctly? Because he's a supervisor over other officers, and he shouldn't be training a puppy. And then with the body worn camera footage that you all get supplied for your various oversight, was it BPD edited? Because that's what they do for the news. And were they able to select which cases you got body cam footage for? And do you consider use of force in your assessment of DT's compliance? Because I can bring up cases where mental health was involved. Marcus Martin, who was killed in his own home because he shot at a robot that busted down his door. Timothy Fleming, who was shot and killed in the hallway of his home in front of his children, and the children are still living in that house. And then you have Mackay Franklin, as far as you wanna talk about the youth. Mackay Franklin survived his shooting, but he was 17. He was running away, and they got it on camera that they shot him in his back. And they've recently done that to another young man over in West Baltimore. The police brutality shootings have continued under the consent decree. They have not gone down. They have not gone down. The police brutality cases have not gone away. They have not disappeared. So I just am wondering how you all can like say, oh yeah, they get an 80% passing grade on the misconduct investigations or whatever, and I'm telling you right now, the misconduct investigations are a joke. It's to get them to an unsustained finding, and it happens all the time. I would love to be shown that I'm wrong and that police are actively being prosecuted for brutality, misconduct, killing, use of force, and kicked off the...
Sure, and thank you for that. That's, very helpful questions. In terms of the assessment, trying to take each of them in turn, they are randomly selected. It's by random number generated. We're the ones that select. It's not selected by the BPD. It's done statistically, so from a statistical, this is a kind of social science perspective, although it's only 91 out of 1,400, it is statistically significant from a social science perspective. It is not just, so the monitoring team, we ourselves are lawyers, civil rights lawyers, not just, we do have ex-police, but not just that, so we have civil rights lawyers. You mentioned the cases that are done right are the ones that are done by the feds. Well, the DOJ itself does a parallel review of all of the 91 cases. So the DOJ Civil Rights Division, they're reviewing these right alongside us, and if they disagree with us, they make it known, and we come to a consensus on that. So it's not just us, and as the civil rights lawyer says often, you may not agree with the DOJ, you may not agree all the time, you may not agree with the monitoring team, but together we have looking at this in a number of different angles. On the body-worn camera, yes, we are looking at the unedited body-worn camera. This is raw footage from the machine itself. There's no editorial function involved in that. So, look, all of the issues that you're raising, we're not saying the job's done in use of force and misconduct. We're still working at it, but the process that we are undertaking to review these cases, it's rigorous. It's overseen by the DOJ, Civil Rights Division, and it is robust. So I'm not sure I got everything, but I think we probably want to move on to others.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Hi, I work for Baltimore City Public School. I work currently at the union, and I think it was you that mentioned that the Baltimore City Police.
Can you speak up a little, please? I can hear you.
Okay. The Baltimore City Police and the school police have the same power. Did I hear that correct? Because I'm gonna tell you, prior to me moving over to my current position, we had issues where kids were fighting, and we called the school police. But if they were outside of the perimeters of a school, then we had to hang up and call city police. Then recently there was issues going on at one of our high schools where it was 4 incidents of fighting, and the school police doesn't have that same manpower. But the situation is always the same. When you call school police, they ask where was the location, tell you to call city police. So I'm wondering, are they getting the same memo that they are working together? Or are they getting the same training? Or, I mean, what's going on? Because it seemed like they're doing like this.
Yeah.
You know, don't call me, call Tyrone.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, you point out a very critical issue there. And this MOU, this agreement, clearly lays out when the school police can go off school grounds and enforce laws, for example. It's when, if they're in chasing someone and that.
Chasing them from where, the building
Yeah,
to?
right, and so, let's say a young person is running out of the building and then running into the public way, the street or wherever. In that case, and the school police is the one chasing them, they can continue that chase. They have, so, I mean, it's like very limited, and it's defined when that happens. And the whole thing about calling, you know, who should you call? Yeah, that's a waste. I mean, it uses valuable time, and that is unfortunate. And that does need to be looked at and better coordinated, in a way that instead of you having to call 911, they can reach out over the radio, for example, and request service. So yes, that's a very good issue and question, which I will raise with them. Thank you.
Back in the back. I'm gonna flip flop. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. My name is Tawanda Jones, and I'm the sister of Tyrone West. My brother was brutally executed 587 weeks ago, and for now, for 4,109 days, we've been constantly fighting for accountability before Freddie Gray happened. And when you guys first came in, I was feeling like unsure of things, and I was always prayerful, always hopeful, but we constantly keep getting failed over and over again. I'm trying to figure out how can they get an 87 on their report card when they're brutally murdering us, and it's caught on camera, and even though y'all saying that it's not edited, but everything that we see is edited. It was a man that was just brutally gunned down 2 weeks ago named Robert in West Baltimore, shot 19 times for going up a one-way street. And they said he had a gun on him, but you don't see anywhere on the body cam footage where he's pointing the gun and the weapon was never fired. The news told us that. But my whole point, they're getting worse than when my brother was murdered back in 2013. And I'm a teacher. I work hard every single day. And I have to come home worrying about my children, worrying about everything, and still getting no accountability. And every time I try to do peaceful and right things and try to have hope in the system that's constantly failing us over and over again, it's very heartbreaking. It's disgusting. And then here, this elderly man that literally saw what was going on. He's 80 years, and you look good, by the way, sir. But my whole point is it's constantly happening over and over again. And it's been going on for 400 plus years. 400 plus years, let's just be real. And I keep trying to have faith, but I have faith in God. So at the end of the day, when y'all don't hold him accountable, just know that our blood is on y'all hands. How many more families have to die? How many more? Because guess what? When our loved one is murdered, it murders families. It takes us away. We're wiped out right with our loved one. And then all we do is just ask for accountability. That's all we're asking for. We're not asking somebody to break the law. We're asking for a simple thing that everyone should do. Just like when David Lipperman, he shot up a white Caucasian man who was suffering supposedly from mental health issues. He was able, because of his skin color, let's be clear, to shoot an officer in the face, take a car, shoot another officer, and walk to accountability. My poor brother wasn't doing anything wrong, unarmed, brutally murdered, executed, beat to death by 17 killer cops. And the one who was set on his neck was from Morgan State University because of a false signal 13. And pretty much did what we saw happen to George Floyd. My whole point, I'm tired of going around the world. I'm tired of meeting families for a club that we didn't sign up for. We don't ask for this pain, but for people to actually sit there and literally ignore our pain, literally keep leaving us with these predators. Literally keep saying, oh, you guys are safe. Just imagine. And that's why I love working with children. I have 2 degrees, one in social work, one in school. Education. I picked education because social work is a system that's combated to pretty much oppress my people, and I can get paid way more. I get pennies. I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul. Peter to pay Paul. Just to teach these babies and keep them safe. But my whole point, that's like me knowing they're getting abused, and I'm starting leaving them with the product, leaving them with the pedophile and saying, you're safe. And they get an 87 on their report card. He didn't touch you today, baby. Don't dress like this. Don't go sit on Uncle Pedophile's lap. That is disgusting to me. Thank you. Oh, and then, last but not least, my First Amendment rights been violated. You protest online in person. Facebook done shut me down, and the police just recently shut down when we were videoing from Baltimore Block was getting raw footage, nothing exciting, no riot, just peacefully out there advocating, talking, telling them about the gun trace task force before it even happened. When they saw that people were breaking in someone's home, that's what happened to my brother. If he was killed, it looked like a house where they broke in my brother's home, put his stuff out. What brother breaks in someone's home, put their stuff out? And by the way, Louise, the first one, the one she told you about, this Martin Michelle Bell, the one that victimized her family, killed my brother. I keep meeting victims, and this man's still working the job. He gets to marry someone. But my First Amendment right been broke. Every time I go speak out, my car tires get slashed, and then they shot my Facebook down. I can't even put my brother's stuff on Facebook. They said when I had the lady from Brooklyn home, because guess what? Even though we fight for police brutality, we're out here for community violence too. What happened in Brooklyn Park should have never happened. And for me to have the mother of Aaliyah on my show, my podcast, and they shut me down there, and she wasn't even saying nothing but speaking up for her poor baby, and they said, you are exciting and riot, and shut my Facebook Live completely down. So I had no First Amendment rights. It's disgusting. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, with all of the upgrading you said you're doing and the changing of
Well,
how.
not us, we don't do the upgrades.
Well, I mean,
We
the police
assess.
department.
Yeah, we assess what
Training-
they're doing.
training that goes on.
All? Are you gonna pretend this woman didn't just lay out her pain and trauma and just move on to the next thing? That's so crazy.
I'm not sure, what question was she asking us? We'll answer her question. We'll allow her to vent.
Passing the First Amendment.
I certainly understand and we appreciate her situation, but, man, do you have a question? I mean, we'll answer your question if you have a question.
How are they passing the First Amendment part of 87 when they're completely violating not just my rights, everybody's rights? How are they getting to 87? That's what I want to know.
You want to try that?
I mean, you could read the assessment report, and you can, the assessment report is not based on any one given incident. We have a methodology that we follow. It's approved by the Department of Justice, and you know, I don't know the circumstances of your particular issue on Facebook. Certainly, if there's an issue there, it should be elevated to the police department and any other accountability function.
See, what we do, so that people, look, the consent decree is a limited remedy. This was a lawsuit, okay? The parties sat down and they put together 511 paragraphs in an effort to determine whether or not they could fix the police department. Our job as monitors is to look at the 511 paragraphs in the 17. We don't go beyond that, okay? Our job is to determine from the data we get whether or not requirements are being met or not being met. There are a lot of things bad in this world. I mean, I understand that. Look, I grew up in Baltimore City. You know, I'm not as old, but I'm pretty close. I remember the Vini brothers. I mean,
Yeah, I do
a lot of
too.
bad things have happened in this town. Unfortunately, the consent decree is designed to address the 511 paragraphs that were negotiated between the Department of Justice and the City of Baltimore and the Baltimore City Police Department. So, your event, if that came, if we saw it, we would look at it, it would factor into the analysis. Now keep in mind when we say, you know, there's an 80% or 90%, that means there are 10% of bad cases out there. But we don't ask for 100%. What we ask was a certain standard.
It just seems like all my pain is just getting pushed into a down. Nobody's doing nothing about it. It just keeps, they even use my brother. You can go back in this case because this case was a part of your consent decree. I sat down with the monitoring team. So you can go back and all you can say, yeah, they fell to in this way, they fell to in that way. But how are they going to correct how they fell? There's no remedy. There's no remedy at all, none whatsoever. That's all I'm saying.
I understand, and I hope you understand what I'm saying. We're limited in terms of what we do. We get to look at the 511 paragraphs. Okay? All right. Okay. No, somebody was over here. I get this man.
Okay, with the upgrading of what the police department is doing and the new protocol, has it been considered to lengthen in detail and more in-depth training? A totally complex training period. I mean, going all the way back to these potential employees that are supervisors, managers, police department, go all the way back to see what kind of, manners that they implemented into whatever they were doing as children or teenagers or even in the service or just in general, just go farther back into the history. Because if you don't really go that far back, sometimes they just cover a couple of years and then they bring them into the force. And all that stuff that they have been doing, all the damage that might have been done when they were children or, you know, other jobs or just personalities that they inherited from some place or another, they bring that into their workplace. So go way back, go farther back, spend more time learning about their history. And then when you bring them in, have a lot more time in the training program before you put them out on the street, before they're actually becoming policemen, or even when you have somebody, you know, watching them, somebody who has a superior title. Don't put them out there so soon. And they need some psychological training. If they can't handle the psychological training, don't hire them. Psychological is the number one problem. This sister and all these people that have been talking, psychological problems. And so you can't wait to bring in a psychologist. You need to know how to handle it on the spot, because this is the danger zone. And then when they do find these police officers and supervisors that are negligent, what have you, when they do stuff, they give them administrative leave.
They get paid.
They don't need to be working.
They get paid.
They need to go someplace else and cool out, put them in a place where they can learn how to deal with the public, or maybe they don't need to.
So let me try to answer what you
Yeah,
really
what's that?
It's two pieces to this. The first is training, which I'll talk about in a minute. The first thing you're talking about is how they screen people before they're hired, and they do that. Now, they are outside professional psychological, psychiatric companies that do the training. I'm not a psychiatrist. Randy, you may know more about it than I do, but that's the first step. That does happen. And they dig into the person's personality. They try to figure whether that person is an appropriate person to be hired by the police department. That's the first step. Now, the training is very good. The training that they have is very good. They not only train the recruits, but there's annual training for in-service officers in every area in the decree. It is really intensive training, and the training program in Baltimore City has been looked at as being among the best in the country. So I think the department is trying. Does that mean that some people get through the screening that shouldn't be there? Of course. Does that mean that people, even when they're trained, do they screw up? Of course. But the idea is to have a system in place where you minimize those kinds of bad people. And I think the systems that we see in this department are in place. Randy, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the psychological piece.
But one of the things I'm also hearing is that, as the gentleman here said before, your life experiences go way back from the time of this consent decree, which is only, 7 years old. You also go back 30, 40 years.
50, 60 years.
More than that. And yeah, and I know from Mr. Thompson that that's part of the struggle, is that I think, yes, there have been improvements. And yes, 80% or 90% is not good enough. We want to get to 100%. But on the other hand, too, as I think also I'm hearing Mr. Thompson say is, we can't undo the terrible things that have happened. And to try to pretend everything is fine is you're only going to find that offensive. You know, it's going to insult your own experiences. So I do recognize that, and I wish there was some way that we could start from a clean slate, but I don't know if that's possible. Just quickly, he's asked me to talk about, they are doing intensive psychologicals. They do believe that we need to go back.
And what about stopping the administrative leave? Keeping them working as administrators, the ones who've been found guilty police officers.
But he wasn't going to get paid for the time he was off.
No, there's loss of
They don't
leave.
need to get paid for anything.
They don't
get paid for that. They
loss of leave.
They lose that dollar.
And then they get suspended. You can go online and look at what they call the disciplinary matrix. They're on administrative leave when they're under investigation. But the penalties they receive, it depends on the severity, right? If they do something minor, then they may just get a reprimand. But if they do something major, it's up to termination, and they can lose time.
Even minor stuff is important, because minor.
Everything's important.
They shouldn't even allow minor stuff. It builds.
Right. Well, again, the individual that I was speaking about, turning his body camera on 5 minutes late. He did that enough times that he was going to lose vacation time because of that.
I just want to ask one more thing. Have they thought about drones to surveil some of the areas where things are happening and it's progressing, and you can't get somebody's camera to work or footage is not being covered? Send
Yes.
those drones up in the air, they can
But,
zoom.
but that's police enforcement action, which again is not
It's a
covered
good
under the
idea.
consent decree. Having said
Are
that,
they considering?
well,
It
you know
needs
what,
it.
I think they tried it with the planes and the ACLU objected to it. I mean, look, a lot of citizens are concerned about their First Amendment rights. That's not something that we deal with, that's a decision.
It's an idea, because this is a new world.
Well, the cameras need to be 100%.
But the cameras do have to be
That's the
100%.
goal. These cameras
That's right.
will be 100%, and they're very close to it now.
Yeah.
So there will not be tolerance for events that aren't photographed.
Yeah.
And
Well, if
so
something's
far-
not working, if they're not working, then you can have the airborne cameras.
Well, yeah, I think the issue, as Mr. Thompson's pointing out, is that basically that would be a violation of y'all's right to have somebody spying on you and you don't want to be spied on. But I do understand. I think you wanted to ask another.
No, I'm gonna ask.
Yeah,
another-
you've been waiting since the beginning,
Yeah.
yeah. Right here, ma'am.
I won't yield to you yet.
Okay.
So, back in the 60s and 70s, the police were officer friendlies. I'm gonna say this, I was married to a military police, and we've lived from Panama to Virginia to Tennessee, and of course I've gotten all that flavor, San Antonio, Texas, of what is going on out there before coming home in 2000 and being a part of the Community Relations Council at Northwest. I'm just looking at how many different commissioners I've worked under, and that they've come from New York, California, New Orleans. And all of this is versus Baltimore. And I even attempted to be a police officer. I went through the training. I went through everything that I couldn't pass the run, thank God. I was out of shape. But honestly, when I look at what we've gone through, back when I started in 2000, Patricia Jessamy at that time was our state's attorney talking about the mental health. And it wasn't just about people in general, it was about the police officers as well. And so they are humans, and I get that. And we can be compassionate, but not when they are killing folks on the street. We talked with Bats, and we were trying to get, after he created a 1,000-page something another he wanted the police to go through, we talked about using the tasers, and so we started flooding in the tasers and this kind of thing. And then they went right to the hospital, and the gentleman was having a seizure, and they used the taser on him. And so, you know, when you look at Baltimore City, of course, you know, New York, everybody makes fun of us as if they don't have problems. But we, you know, I mean, we got Commissioner Norris, we got all these folks, all these different personalities. And it's hard because they keep changing our offices, because the offices say, you're not paying us, we're not doing this, we're not doing that. No, you're not doing it. Then we went through a lot of training, me and the young lady, Kim Trueheart, we all back in the day, we went through workshops with the police, role plays. I had one woman show up to the meeting and tell us that her husband or partner had been like killed right in front of their house as they're like removing groceries from the car. And she wanted the police to, you know, feel that compassion of what she'd gone through. And then she said that they weren't, you know, they didn't have empathy. And because they didn't, they started sounding like or becoming like doctors. When you go there, you say, you know, I've got this pain. I'm like, oh, you know, you're a hypochondriac or something like that. What is it? You know, it's like they get desensitized. And so that's where we are. We're dealing with desensitized men and women on the streets because people, the children, the youth, I worked with the military, I worked with the city schools, the police, everybody is under some kind of stress. And so when you are creating your consent decree, and when you've gone through all that you did and your assessments, there's nothing like the real life being on the street and what happens when they're doing it real time and that response to a real time situation. And so I encourage more police officers need to be in this kind of meetings. They need to be with the people, and they need to work with Shorty. Because Shorty has been out there with Tyrone West and everybody, and honestly, it won't stop. And so, and the tragedy just recently just makes no sense, and that's, I'm gonna yield to Shorty.
So let me answer just real quick.
Yes, okay.
There are a lot of areas in the consent decree, and I don't want people to think that the department has been given a free ride. The reality is just the opposite. The department has not, they've only been found in compliance in 2 areas, okay? We talked about another 3 that are on board, but that's, even if they come on board, there's still gonna be 12 that they have to fix. Now, there's some big areas out there. You've got use of force, which they're not in compliance. There's a stop, search, and arrest area where there's a real problem with that. They're not even close.
They ain't getting no reporting yet. They ain't got no paper reports.
Hold on, there are all kinds of areas that they're not in compliance. So my point is that our job is to look at this consent decree, which is designed to make this a better police department. This department is not there yet. So people have to understand, this is people get mad and say, what's taking so long? This is a hard job. This is a hard process. And if you're gonna evaluate it correctly, you have to take time to do it. They're not ready for prime time in a bunch of serious areas. But the idea and the plan is to spend enough time training them, do the screening process for trying to bring in better officers. You don't want the cops like the guy that pushed the guy's face in the street, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and Commissioner, what was the commissioner then?
4 years ago was Commissioner Harrison.
Harrison is the one who, when he saw the body on camera footage, not only did he say, I'm gonna fire the guy, he actually went to the state's attorney's office and said, this guy needs to be prosecuted, and that's what happened. So we're trying to we're trying to let this culture change. It's like trying to turn a aircraft carrier around in the inner harbor. It's not easy, it takes time to do, but the object is to make this department better. And like I said earlier, it's just like, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time.
Yeah.
You have to take steps and methodical steps to work on this department to get them to the point where they are a 21st century constitutional police department. They're not there yet, and we're not saying it.
And I believe you, and honestly, we just can't bring back humans. We can't bring back humans' lives. And this is a serious piece before Elon Musk brings in those artificial intelligence.
Well, we got a whole lot, but don't mention his name.
Yeah, right.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Okay, but
We're gonna
there's-
make this real simple, all right? You
Yeah.
said that, you said First Amendment rights, correct?
Yes.
You said mental health, correct?
Yes.
Those are 2 of 17
2 of the
areas.
7, all right?
2 of 17.
So, I've been policing the police since 2006, all right? And I got it in a book, so I was administrative assistant to the engineering officer in the USS Mississippi. Right here is my program, Shorty program. That's the United States Supreme Court, all right? This is my Shorty program. Everything that you was talking about, I got it documented. Right here is your constitutional rights violation. Now, you asked for, that's the Department of Justice. That's 2006.
Have you given this to the Department of Justice?
Yes, you do got it. Everything.
No.
Yes.
Have you given this to the Department of
No,
Justice?
Judge Bedard got this already. See this?
Okay.
That's Commissioner Harris.
Yeah.
All right. That's Chief Judge Mary Barbera, and this is Judge Bedard. All right. This is your Department of Justice, and y'all ain't did nothing about nothing.
Well, we're not the Department of Justice.
No. Your dissent decree ain't did nothing about nothing, because the dissent decree got this when what her name was, Alicia or Alicia, the first lady that was here, the first set of dissent decree people over here.
I have no
When
idea.
they
who
first
you're
came
talking
here,
about.
I gave them this information. This information is on court record, on court file, and with Judge Bedard, and Judge Bedard ain't did nothing. Now, I've been arrested 4 times for terrorist activities, charged with terrorism. And again, 2 weeks ago, Thursday, by Fox 45, your police department came, they got a warrant out for me. You know what I'm saying? I gotta go to court. So I'll get that to you too. So we don't have no misunderstandings about nothing.
Let me ask you, have you filed a complaint with PIB?
I filed a complaint with God itself.
No, but you need to file.
I filed a complaint with everybody and I don't get nothing back. So you got the thing with Judge Bedard tomorrow, this court date right there. Y'all need to be there at this court. Y'all need to ask these people for this paperwork, because
But that's not the way we do it.
I understand it ain't the way you do it, but it need to be
Well, let
done.
me explain to you how we work.
I understand how you, I'm from Chicago. When you said the dissent decree in Chicago, I'm from Chicago. So I understand how you work. You do paperwork.
No, our job is to assess, okay? We're not.
And nothing ever gets done with an assessment.
Okay, all right. Any other
You know what I'm
questions?
saying?
Yes, sir.
Who's tasked with training police officers for the mental health and the de-escalation type things when they interact with citizens? When I say who's doing it, is it somebody outside of the department or somebody
What
in the
we've done
department?
is to ask people from the community to help participate in that training. And they are part of that process. So we have a whole group of community-based faculty working with officers to create the training that results in their skills. And what we have been impressed with is that they're getting the concepts of de-escalation and beginning to really understand how important it is.
Are they required to sit through the classes, the police department?
Oh, yeah. And one of this is an honest assessment. Baltimore has more hours devoted to mental health and de-escalation training than almost any other department in the nation. And I'm impressed with the results of that, I'll be honest with you. The problem I see is that it hasn't made its way to what you all are experiencing now, and that's discouraging. But on the other hand, I would tell you honestly, yes, and I think their training is very good. It's scenario-based, meaning that they have to do something that is very realistic based on what's happened in the street. It's graded, and there's a number of things that I'm impressed with in that regard. So yes.
One other thing, how long is the monitoring committee gonna be around, time-wise?
Until they reach compliance, we are around.
In all areas.
In all areas. But after they reach compliance, they have to show they can do it on their own for an extended period of time. In the area you're talking about, that's gonna be 2 years in which they're constantly reevaluated to see if they're maintaining their gains.
We're gonna take 2 more questions because we have to respect people's time. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd like to know the percentage of officers who live in the neighborhood that they're policing, or at least in close proximity. The young lady here mentioned officer friendly. Haven't seen him in a long time. And I do believe you would eliminate a lot of these issues. That blue line is because it's them versus us, because they live somewhere else. I once asked about 20 years ago at a community meeting, police came by and I asked, how many of you live in the community that you work? The issue was they were afraid to, because if the neighborhood understood where I am, where I'm living, they may be attacked. Their children, they were always afraid their families might be under the threat of violence. But I do believe if you could ever breach that perspective, it would change the whole paradigm. It's just like term limits and campaign financing changes would change our whole political structure, just basically. So I'd like to know, what is the barrier from preventing that from happening? And then what are the numbers? What are the obstacles that are preventing, as I get it, that police officers do not live in the community? Oftentimes they don't even live in the city. Is that?
I think what you raised is actually a bigger issue. And I don't know, you have the numbers?
I don't have the numbers. I know they're available. They do have, they are, and I don't think this is necessarily a requirement of the consent decree, but I do know that they are working to make programs to encourage city residents to become police officers. They have take-home car program. I believe they might even have
they have incentives.
There's a home buying incentive for officers.
Let me broaden this question, because this is a serious problem, and it's called community policing. Okay, this to some extent this had a lot to do with what happened in Brooklyn. Was it last summer, summer before last? The department is not doing well in this area at all. Whether they're going to require officers to live in the city or in the same neighborhood. I mean, that's an issue that's not a consent decree issue. But what is a consent decree issue is the police department has to figure out a better way to engage with the members of the community. Whether that means living in the community or doing things when they're out on patrol where they're just not talking to people when they're arresting them. You know, you want to have voluntary contacts between the police officers who serve in your neighborhood and the community and the public that they serve. So, you know, the idea is the community policing aspect of the consent decree is putting a lot of pressure on the department to figure out a way to do a much better job of engagement. That's a part of the decree. Your questions are very specific and quite micro and very good, but they're really not under the consent decree per se. But I think your question does go to community policing. One more question.
All right.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I'll be quick. I wanted to talk about loitering and low-level crimes. So the directive with most police officers that we come in contact with is that they're not to approach them, the people that's loitering and drug dealers that's standing on the corner. And that directive, in a meeting yesterday with the commissioner, it comes from up top and trickles down to the majors and lieutenant colonels and things like that. In the monitoring, what can we do about that? The low-level crimes, they're not going to, prostitution, all those things that we're complaining about, they're not going to do anything about it.
Those are, unfortunately, that's not a direct consent decree issue. That's law enforcement. Those are the strategies that the police department decides to
to do or not do. The complaint that you were hearing years ago from police officers who didn't want to do their job was the consent decree doesn't let me
Yes,
do this. And
that's
that's
what
not
we hear.
the case. The consent decree does not stop any police officer from doing whatever they need to do, so long as it don't violate someone's constitutional rights. They can't illegally search them. They can't illegally arrest them. I mean, they have to have probable cause to arrest. They have to have reasonable articulable suspicion to pat them down. As long as they have it, they can do whatever they want to do. Now, how the department decides to enforce the law, that's up to the department. But the consent decree, and I'm glad you asked that question, because that's been out here for a long time. You know, police officers, it's not all, because most of these police officers are probably doing the best they can, but those who don't want to do their job can sometimes use the consent decree as an excuse. And I'm just telling you, this consent decree does not stop proactive policing so long as it's done in a legal, constitutional way.
I think they're afraid of being prosecuted.
Well, I don't know what it is, but the point is the consent decree doesn't stop it. And if you are afraid, then you shouldn't be policing. Okay? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, folks. Thank you so much.
I just want to say, you're up there talking about how always at 80% compliance,